First period, I can pinpoint the day I got my period because of what was on television.
Nice.
I remember it. I remember being really angry that I got my period during sweeps.
That is the most Lauren thing I've ever heard in my life.
I was so upset.
Also, the idea that it would ruin your week somehow. You know, like that idea, like we are just brought up to truly fear this moment happening.
I was not happy about it. And I felt like, I was going to ruin my week of the finales.
Dang.
I know. So it's embarrassing, but yet on-brand story that I felt I had to share. And when we get to that episode of Murphy Brown, I'll tell it again.
We will talk about it.
Hey, guys, this is the week I got my period.
Honestly, we should acknowledge it. It should be acknowledged.
We should, right?
Ready graphics? Ready theme?
Good evening. For your information tonight.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mullins.
And I'm Lauren Milberger.
And this is FYI,
the Murphy Brown Podcast.
It's season 3.
Scream singing, aka Skrelting.
He's oddly blinking.
Jim arrives.
Sorry, cacti.
Warning, goes my brain.
Ooh, leather.
And on today's episode,
we'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 1, the 390th broadcast.
Hello. It's season 3.
We've made it. We've made it to the season I think a lot of us have been waiting for.
Oh, a lot of us have been waiting for. It's one of our favorite seasons.
A couple things happened this season, just a couple, but we're not there yet. We're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. We like the gang are getting back from vacation.
Yes, the gang are back from vacation, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Oh,
speaking of you saying that, quote unquote, nothing of note happens. I found this little clip online. I don't know what it's from. I think it might be from TV Guide. But it's interesting because it's a quote from Diane about the beginning of season 3. Obviously, they've just won the Emmy. They're riding high. It says, going into the 3rd season, people expect you're going to make a radical change, says executive producer Diane English. We really aren't.
Mm-hmm.
There will be nothing that's groundbreaking for Murphy.
Nothing.
One issue the show will address, she says, is racism. The issue will be sprinkled in several shows. The controversial foul-mouthed journalist Jerry Gold will reappear. Murphy had a brief affair with him last season. English says viewers loved him and felt that Murphy had finally met her match.
Her male match. And let's be honest, it's true.
Now, technically, Diane, I guess, is right. But the end of the season, spoiler alert, as many people know, there's a bit of a shakeup.
I would say a radical change.
Radical change, which, listen, at this point, they may not have thought about yet. So this episode aired September 17th, 1990. We are officially in the 1990-91 season. It was directed by Barnett Kellman. And a fun piece of trivia today is that in 2023, it is the 100th anniversary of Warner Brothers. And so you may see a lot of documentaries. Happy birthday, WB. And we have some change to the writing staff. We've unfortunately said goodbye to Russ Woody, and as we've mentioned, Norm Gunzenhauser and Tom Seeley. But we welcome Tom Palmer, who had actually worked on My Sister Sam with Corby and Diane, worked on the first season of Mad Men. Peter Tolan, who created Rescue Me and wrote very heavily on The Larry Sanders Show. And then Cy Duquesne and Denise Moss are now regular members of the staff.
No longer freelance.
No longer freelance. Also interesting, which I hadn't realized, was that the Murphy Brown soundtrack came out September 4th. This is airing September 17th. And if anyone is not familiar with the Murphy Brown soundtrack, it's pretty much just songs from the show and a couple of audio clips of Murphy singing and talking about Gladys Knight and the Pips. It's very cute. I think the little clips of her talking in between the songs are great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And don't forget, you can now follow along with Murphy Brown and watch the episodes on the Internet Archive.
So before I even jump into the opening, we might as well talk about the music, the song at the top of this episode, because it is part of this opening.
That's right, it is.
We open on the bullpen, specifically the closed elevator, where we hear the dulcet tones of Candice Bergen scream singing, aka Skrelting, the song I'm Gonna Make You Love Me. Lauren, take it away with the song.
Yes, so I'm Gonna Make You Love Me was not originally sung by Candice Bergen, but was sung by the Temptations and the Supremes together. It was on an entire album of duets that they sang together. It peaked at number 3 in April of 1969 on the Motown label. It is produced by Frank Wilson and Nick Ashford. Interesting enough, we have talked about Ashford and Simpson on the show before. It is the 4th iteration of this song that was released between 1968 and 1969.
Wow, they really like that song.
Yeah, it was safe to say the most popular version of the song. And the name of that album, by the way, was Diana Ross and the Supremes Join the Temptations.
Oh, interesting. I like
Yes.
the placement of who was the home field advantage. Who was joining who?
Yeah, a lot of conversation was probably had about how that was going to be worded. That's my guess. What I also really love about this opening is that it's such a season 3 opening. We know this character. We love
Yes.
this character. It's a little meta wink. I'm gonna make you love me no matter what. Coming off an Emmy win, it feels very like we're the show going, hey, we're back.
It really is. I mean, they literally, Corky walks in being like, I'm back. Like, everyone is making this like fresh-faced post-vacation. They were coming back from hiatus. They're big winners. There was a happy send-off. And that, like, everyone is just in this place of like returning from summer vacation, which I love because it immediately made me be like, danger. Including the talk, which this is jumping ahead a little bit, but they talk about how it's their 13th season. And I was like, that is so unlucky. And then I love that Miles actually comes in and says, who calls 13 unlucky? I was
Yeah.
like, I do. And y'all are too happy.
It's so funny. I never even thought about that. And I've seen this episode a million times. It's one of my favorites of season 3. And you're so right. I had not thought of that. It is, yeah, their 13th season is not so lucky.
Nope. And that whole, thing about like, do buildings have 13th floors and all that? I
Yeah.
mean, I just immediately was like, this is a bad sign.
It's such an American thing too, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
an issue in other countries, which I always think is interesting.
So Candace is on the elevator, skrelting out, look out, boys, I'm going to get ya. It opens as she is finishing screaming, I'm going to make you love me. Woo! Everyone in the elevator is in pain. The bullpen is applauding.
Yes.
I just have to sidebar. I love this plaid suit that she's wearing.
I love her entire outfits this episode, which all are similar motif going on. But yeah, I love this. This is also the outfit that she wears in the season 3 promo shots.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
So based off the promo shots, is it as green tan as it looks in the footage now, or is that a color fading situation? In the promo pictures, does it have that green tint to it?
I don't think it does. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I think of it as like a green tan, but regardless, she enters the victorious woman. Did everybody miss her? They all say, yeah, sure. She doubts Bob very playfully at his desk and says to see her after work. This is again, everyone, she is so perky that it makes me nervous. She and Frank see each other. They hug. They bond over their vacations and being ready to get back to work. Murphy said she had R&R. Frank went on an archaeological dig and found a Pez dispenser. If this baby could talk. And he asks Murphy, where was this R&R? And she said she went to Heaven on Earth baseball camp. A week in Florida training with Dodger legends. Frank, of course, is thrilled to hear this. And she says, remember that trouble she had pitching low and inside? Not anymore. Though Steve Garvey won't be needing a vasectomy anymore. Jim arrives. He, again, playfully, not really, playfully scolds Frank that he left a cherry yogurt on his desk for 4 weeks. They happily shake hands. Nothing more is said. Murphy, they hug. And then Frank asks why he didn't get a postcard from Jim when he was in Nantucket. And Jim gets very rigid, as Jim does, and says, why? Because Nantucket was a living hell. Doris and I will never share our house with the Rooneys again. I also have to point out Charlie Kimbrough's extension of the ooh vowel with the Rooneys again. Made me so happy. Apparently Andy Rooney drove them out of their minds. And Charlie Kimbrough then does an Andy Rooney impression that I will not recreate here, but I will share what he said, which is,
very good.
Did you ever wonder why crabs walk sideways? Did you ever notice that you can never get sand out of your bathing suit? And why is it when you cut nose hair, it grows in even thicker? Doris got so upset she tried to run him down with a dune buggy. Jim cannot tell them how glad he is that they're back.
Every day Doris is my hero. This is such an interesting thing because I think this is a news person that I think today most people don't know.
Yes. Yes.
That this is what he did. He just was at the end of 60 Minutes complaining about stuff.
I have such a core memory of those segments with my mother.
Me too. Yeah.
The second he said it, I was like, oh my gosh, I know all of these questions. Also, I do want to say, I won't go into it here, but I did work in a waxing and laser hair removal spa for several years in New York. So I actually do know why you think that your hair grows in thicker. I won't go into it here, but actually it doesn't. Your hair grows in stages. That's all I'll say. But there is a reason, and it's a myth.
Wow. That's not where I thought we were going to go. And
You're welcome.
And I've learned something, though.
Anyway, moving on. So they talk about how it's their 13th season. Warning, warning, goes my brain. Their 390th broadcast. Murphy says she is ready for it. She thinks she can even face a new secretary. And I have to say, again, even with the opening of this episode, where we know these characters, we're ready to go, this is such a testament to the gag of the secretary at this time. As she's walking to the desk, people are already starting to laugh. And this man is not a visual gag. He is a perfectly normal looking man. That's part of the joke. But the fact that she is walking over there confidently has the audience losing it. Unless Frank and Jim did something off screen that we didn't see that they're laughing at. I'm pretty sure it's the fact that there's a secretary.
And we're on Secretary 37.
Secretary 37 does not have a name. Oh, no, he does have a name. I refer to him by his special skill. But Murphy introduces herself so politely, says, "You must be my new secretary." They shake hands. His name is Kevin Mallory. He says he's so thankful for the job. Having a good job during the day helps pay for his studies at night. If you have watched Murphy Brown, you know that that is the cue that something about those studies is going to be the problem.
And I forgot what the study was for a second.
Me too.
I was like,
thrilled.
oh, wait. Oh, no. I don't remember what the studying is, but it's going to be bad.
So Murphy, very pleasant. It's like, oh, he's studying, whatever. It moves on. Says, why don't you start by going to the storeroom and getting some fresh number 2 pencils? He'll find out she goes through them pretty quickly. As he's starting to stand up, she goes, by the way, what are you studying? Murphy's being so nice. Mm-hmm. So nice. In response, he doesn't say a word. He just begins tapping. Excellent tapping, by the way. He taps all the way to the storeroom. What a prince. It is horrifying to watch her watch him. He's incredible, though. He taps his way out. He's doing like chaînés while tapping on his way past the elevator. As the elevator opens to reveal Miles. Who's ready for season 13? Who said that was an unlucky number? And I wrote in all caps, me. I did. He gathers the gang. He's ready to discuss important things. So they all start to sit down. And he says, you know, I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, my girlfriend Audrey, and she said, my girlfriend said something very insightful to me. My girlfriend said, Miles, do you know how unfortunate you are to have the job you have? Also, the way he says that is so Grant Shaw knowing how Jane Leaves speaks. Because he's not doing the accent, but it's so suddenly her kind of cadence.
Yeah.
It's so subtle, but I was like, this is somebody who knows the person they're talking about.
Yeah.
And it says, my girlfriend made me see, and finally by the, wait, let me count this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th girlfriend drop in not that many sentences. Murphy finally erupts in all caps. We get it, Miles. We get it. Does everybody get it? And the entire bullpen just chants, Miles has a girlfriend and her name is Audrey. To which Miles whips around and goes, is everybody finished? I also love, there's this tiny thing that Joe Regalbuto has where it almost looks like he's conducting the group.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
I don't know if he's actually doing it or if his hand is just moving with him, but because he's in the foreground and facing everybody, it almost looks like he's cueing them to do it.
Hilarious.
It's precious. We settle back down. Miles wants to know where Corky is, and Frank says no one's heard from her since the wedding. Frank says, must have been a good honeymoon if you know what I mean, and giggles. Jim, ever the gentleman, says, yes, Frank, we all know what you mean. May I suggest we practice a little restraint when she arrives? After all, Corky was, well, innocent, and sometimes, well, deflowering can be a traumatic experience for young women.
Oh my God.
I love him so much. I
love the juxtaposition of this, because that's what Jim is saying is kind of what in media, right?
Yeah.
Be a virgin on your wedding night was sort of, depicted. And I love what happens next. I love the fact that she's like, I like sex. Sex is great.
It's phenomenal. I love that it comes from the character we assume would be more conventional.
Yeah. But she's like, oh, sex is great.
I'm so happy for her. I'm so happy she got this. Now, at that moment, this is when Corky arrives. hi, everybody, I'm back. She's in a lovely little outfit that I want to wear to work, which is a brown shirt, a skirt, this big earth tone scarf, and like a giant bow with kind of a matching
Yes. Her
scrunchie
hair
situation.
looks fabulous.
Hair is like she looks like a woman who is like comfortable in her body.
She looks like a woman
know.
who's had many orgasms.
She looks like a woman who has been mussed, and we love to see it. She apologizes to the bullpen for not writing thank you cards to everyone for, their lovely presents and gifts, which, by the way, I have a personal vendetta against the assumption of thank you cards. As someone who got married in the last several years, I just think that there is something that defeats the purpose of saying thank you if everyone expects you to do it.
Very good point. And personally, I still have not finished all of the thank you notes from my bat mitzvah. So yeah.
She says she's sorry for not writing those, but Will and she have been busy. In fact, they were so busy on their honeymoon, they hardly left the hotel room. Busy, busy, busy.
This whole thing, Faith's delivery of busy, and then what she says to Murphy, it's just, I love her in this episode.
She's so good.
She's so on point.
I took a screen cap of the moment that she says busy, busy, busy of Jim, Miles, and Frank. Miles looks like he is just dead inside. Frank is delighted, and Jim is holding his fish mug and is just starting to, he just looks disgusted and concerned, and it is fantastic. I will send it to you. We will post it. It's incredible.
Oh my God.
She says, they were busy morning, noon, and night. Sometimes they were busy 3 times in one morning. Then she turns to Murphy, and in classic Corky, oh, Murphy, I hope you get busy soon.
I hope you get busy real soon. And
Real
it's
soon.
Oh, it's just so and she does it in this different way where she kind of takes it in I feel so bad that you're missing out on this great thing, but also I'm being delicate about it at the same time. It's got so many levels to it. It's one of my favorite quirky moments.
I also just imagine that there was a moment once they really figured out what they were doing and she realized what busy could really provide for a person. I feel like while she was on her honeymoon, she had a thought and it explained Murphy to her. She was like, oh, this is why Murphy is XYZ. She just needs this.
She needs to get laid more.
She just needs to get laid. Oh, poor Murphy. She just needs this wonderful experience. I just feel like she, from her genuine place, was like, that's why she's so caustic.
And then the look on Candace's face also after she says it to her is
she's like, oh, of course you don't have this.
Yeah.
Or just excuse me. Who's going to get knocked up? It's going to be me. Anyway, so...
Spoiler.
Miles gathers them back to attention. He wants to open with saying and is interrupted by the tapping secretary making his way back across into Murphy's office, doing some great shoulder work as well, I must say. And Miles gathers himself back together and says, maybe it's time to breathe new life into FYI. Maybe make some changes. Jim stands and counters that FYI has been very successful, but Miles counters, research shows that they're not adding new viewers, and if this trend continues, their audience in 2000 will be a guy named Mort. Which, wow, when I realized that how far of a predictor that was. We are farther away from 2000 than they were when this joke was made.
Yeah, I know.
That's fun. Mm-hmm. And he says he's not suggesting wholesale changes. They have carefully selected a dozen impartial viewers where they're going to screen a show for them and hear their suggestions. Murphy stands up and says, just call it what it is, a focus group. And Frank shares the trauma that the last time they had one, Frank had to wear a toupee. He felt like he was telling the news with a dead beaver on his head. And I love that we finally got an explanation for why Frank wore a toupee in those first seasons.
No, I love that. That's great.
I was like, thank you. Thank you for referencing. And Miles shuts them all down, says, listen to you people. You're afraid to get some honest feedback from the American public. Looks like he'll be attending it himself. It's this afternoon, 10th floor testing facility, if anyone decides that they want to join him. Murphy laughs and says, as if any of them have the slightest interest in what a focus group has to say. We cut to
the focus group. Miles is in a room with wonderful leather chairs behind two-way glass, and a woman in glasses is explaining to him all about how the focus group works. They're going to be on one side. They're going to say what they think. No one's going to be able to see that they're behind here. And she does this great, crazy laugh. I absolutely love. I love it so much. It's such a small role, but this is one of my favorite, small little guest stars because she, brings her own little, spin to it, which I think is great.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, the gang shows up.
Who would have thunk?
I love as they come in and Miles literally like, well as them. Look who's here. Gladys Knight and her pips. And Murphy assures that they aren't there for the focus group. You know, she just wanted to show everyone the chairs. And I this cast is so good at the little sort of like they mutter to themselves kind of a thing where like everyone sort of adds something, you know, which a lot of times is actually scripted, but sometimes it's not. And I love that Frank's like, ooh, leather. And Jim says, oh, my mother told me about these. Like,
So good.
and then all of a sudden you hear behind the two-way glass, let's begin our discussion as the FYI theme song ends and everyone runs into their seat. And then Miles chuckles to himself. So we then proceed to watch this crazy focus group of everyday people. First of all, they're asked, what do they think of Jim? Would Jim be someone they would invite into their home every Wednesday night? This very obviously blue-collar man says that Jim doesn't seem the type that you would invite to a spur-of-the-moment tractor pull. I love the spur of the moment addition to that. That's what makes it sort of a golden little joke, like spur of the moment
Honestly,
tractor pull.
Having grown up in rural America.
Oh, please,
yeah.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
No, that would definitely happen.
What I also love is that every time something terrible is sort of said, we kind of go back into the room with the gang. And as they're talking about Jim, everyone sort of swivels towards him. And then particularly something I notice is that you see that Charles Kimbrough is his posture is perfect.
Oh,
Not that it
yeah.
isn't always, but like it's so like erect and perfect for the next joke, which is that someone feels that Jim looks like he forgot to take the hanger out of his jacket. Miles assures Jim that it's all constructive criticism, Jim man, he calls him. And Jim agrees. He walks around, which I love, and he walks up to the glass and he's very professional about it. Oh, of course, it can be very helpful. And then he taps on the glass and says, I can see you, Tubby. So Jim is not taking it very well.
No, like Jim, is known for doing. He talks a talk that he can't walk sometimes.
Yes. And this is on-camera talent. Everyone has a bit of narcissist in them, even if it's not as bad as Murphy.
I love seeing all of their versions of narcissism.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And then one of my favorite bits, they ask about Frank Fontana. What do they think? How would they rate the other male anchor? And someone says, was there another guy?
Oh, Frank. It's the worst thing that could happen to Frank.
It's his worst nightmare, which he says, but like it's like the perfect thing for his character. And then Murphy kind of like gives him a side eye. I appreciate in this that like Murphy isn't actually very mean in this. You can tell that like she does feel bad for him, right? Like she knows how funny this is, which she does. She ends up laughing. But when she apologizes, it's so genuine, right? She's like, I'm sorry. But it's really funny. But she knows how much it's hurting him. And I really appreciate that sort of like balance. Oh, and then someone goes, oh yeah, I remember Frank Fontana. I thought it was a commercial for the hair club for men, which is when Murphy laughs.
I also like that the person who says that is a balding man.
Oh, that's right. It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And Frank compares himself to a high-pitched whistle only dogs can hear. Corky can't take it. She has to close her eyes when they talk about her. And of course, everybody loves Corky. When they're done, she asks what happened, and Murphy says that they hated her. And Murphy is very big about it doesn't matter what they think. And they all begin to walk out. But then they ask about Murphy, and she goes, wait, they're talking about me. Again, biggest narcissist in the room. And one woman says, which at the time, I remember watching this was so funny, and now it feels like legitimately like anyone online, which is this one woman says, Mr. Noriega may have done some bad things, but the way she was yelling at him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, it's Twitter. These people are Twitter.
Yeah, I wish that wasn't still such a real criticism that is lobbed so often. Yeah.
So then we have a woman who is dressed in the focus group with a lot of patterns and a bracelet that I think I had when I was 3. Just saying. Lots of rainbow colors and hearts. That she didn't like the way Murphy dressed. And then, of course, Murphy just barrels into the room yelling, I'm really going to take fashion advice from you. Are those your regular clothes or did you come straight from clown college? And of course, everyone is freaked out. The room is chaos. Murphy is brought back into the room. She slumps in her chair with the FBIers all around her. And Miles is livid that was totally uncalled for. And Murphy just sort of huffs. And Miles gives them a lecture that Not all of it could be helpful, but there were very few positive comments, and that's very telling. And so he's going to bring in an image consultant to get them to be more enticing to a broader audience and, quote, take them into the 90s. So he's bringing in an image consultant, and Murphy says that she hates that. They all come from LA. Nothing good ever comes from LA. And then she gets a devilish look on her face and goes, except a pool boy named Eric at the Bel Air Hotel. So Jesse, I believe that you've brought to us today a segment on focus groups, which I think is interesting because I don't know about you, but I've been in a focus group, but I've never been on the other side of a focus group.
Welcome to focus group history. I've been in several focus groups. Some of my favorites were actually for movies, but I've also been in for products and that kind of stuff. So it is generally accepted that the first instance of what would be go on to be called the focus group occurred during World War II.
Ooh, interesting.
The original research was focused on media messaging, specifically war propaganda. The government wanted to convince the public to go to war and to counteract Nazi propaganda.
Oh.
So it's two people are kind of given the credit for creating this model that would become the focus group, which is Paul Lazarsfeld, who was the director of the Bureau of Applied Social Research at Columbia University, and Robert Merton, a sociologist. They came up with the idea of focused interviews. They were asked in the study to use focused interviews to uncover the social and psychological effects of mass communications. So small groups were given broadcasts, and they were asked to indicate that if they liked them or disliked them at various intervals. Participants were then interviewed as to why they liked or disliked something. The subsequent interviews helped to uncover that radio broadcasts were making Americans less likely to join the war due to their bloody and brutal portrayal of the Nazis and the battles. So they started adjusting American propaganda to counteract that so people would be willing to go to war. At the end of World War II, shockingly, led to a rise in consumerism. And focus groups were more effective, people discovered, than surveys because there's a discrepancy between what people do and what people say they do. We see this a lot with politics. There's an article, I think I've brought it up before, from 538 about the idea that people do not vote as moderately as they say in survey that they do. Because when asked, they actually, they couch it so that they don't seem extreme. They found that more variety of folks would do a focus group than would answer a survey. And they would also get more in the moment actual reactions rather than curated ones. One of the things this made me think about was the difference between, I've seen this a lot in customer service, the difference in the way people express their opinions when they are in front of the person they're talking to versus when they're on the phone and don't have to face them versus when they're on email or text and don't have to do any of those things.
Good point. Yeah.
So the honest responses they were getting out of focused interviews led to more accurate results and an impact on products. So Ernest Dichter, an American psychologist and marketing expert, developed a form of consumer research in the later 40s called motivational research, which utilized psychoanalytic concepts to uncover customer desires and the symbolic meanings of products. Because he believed people bought items not just for the purpose, but also for the values and symbolic meanings the items embodied. And so if you look at like virtue signaling of products right now, like we put these messages behind products because people buy based on how they feel about it, not just what it is. People will buy a lesser quality product if they think the messaging and the morality of that product is stronger.
Oh, well, that fits into this episode, right?
One of the things that I just brought up was, you look at like when Pepsi used Kylie Jenner to try and promote like standing down of conflicts and how that actually ended up backfiring.
Yeah, we could.
So eventually the use of both qualitative and quantitative research from both the original focused interviews and this motivational research turned into the focus groups that we know, and they became the preferred method of qualitative research in the 1970s, which led to their abundance in the 80s.
And that's why I was thinking the 80s, because I know when I was looking up information on image consultants, they were saying that sort of started in the 80s as well, because this idea of like how you dress and how you present yourself really became part of like mainstream culture in corporate America, and then obviously then sort of gravitated towards, entertainment and politics as well.
So I just want to give you a couple notable focus groups. So one of my favorite ones is in the 1950s, the Women Buy Cars Too. Chrysler Plymouth was struggling with the sales of its convertible until focus groups indicated that it was wives, not husbands, choosing more sensible sedans over youthful, exciting cars. They adapted their advertising to target women instead, increasing sales and giving the manufacturer a more family-friendly reputation. Ultimately, it led to the realization that women buy cars as much, if not more, than men, leading to a massive change in how cars are designed, branded, and sold
Oh, wow.
in the 50s. Another one that was massive was a focus group that identified the psychological effects of AIDS on the gay community. And research on homosexuality had little input from the gay community up until the mid-1980s due to homophobia. Due to their history, gay respondents mistrusted psychologists, so researchers needed to create a safe, comfortable environment where members of that community felt that they could express their opinions. It gained insight. It led to them being able to make more definitive connections within the spread of the disease, but also the effect on the community as a whole. And it just led to humanizing this community in a way that had never been done before, because they'd never been put into a room where they were safe and with others like themselves. Yeah. Another one is the focus group that basically saved Domino's Pizza. So the pizza industry was in a downward spiral in 2009, but a focus group was researching the fact that corporate responsibility has a wider impact than we think. Companies typically never admit that they're wrong and instead rev up the PR engines. But Domino's research found that admission is interesting. It's humanizing. When a company admits it's wrong, it begins to seem human, and this lays the foundation for a new relationship. So based on the research, Domino's created a campaign around the simple notion that instead of running from criticism, we listened to it, responded, and created a better pizza. Their sales rose 14.3% over the previous year, the largest quarterly same-store sales increase in fast food history. Another one is that Obama used focus groups because he was up against all the odds. He's Black, he has 2 years experience, he's facing Hillary Clinton, all that kind of stuff. Focus groups were introduced to Obama through these processes, and short film clips of him speaking were shown. The results were that the power of his voice made any ad stronger by creating a deeper connection to him. So they started using his audio more and more and more in ads, because that's what people responded to.
Interesting.
I'm fascinated by the future of focus groups, which is the use of social media surveys, using the like button, voting for things. It's something that's become so popular in social media. So I think we're going to have less and less in-person focus groups and more using of social media as a massive focus group where people can be honest because they can just click a button. So it's the less that we're bringing people into a room, which was the original goal of focused interviews, which was to get their immediate and very human responses. We're now putting them into a dry survey position again, because everyone feels like they're authentic on the internet, when we're going back towards surveys.
That was so fascinating. I'm so glad that you brought that.
So anyway, I could talk about it all day. I find it so fascinating. But we should probably cut to what's happening in the episode, shall we? So the gang is in the bullpen. They are gathered, standing. And Murphy is in an outfit. It is one that stands out to me on her as it looks like a costume. This is one where it looks like a costume to me.
It's very big. I feel like it's indicative of stuff she'll wear sort of later in the series, maybe. But I like it for her, but not in real life.
When I first saw it, I was like, oh, did Murphy dress up to trick the image consultant? So I was like,
wow.
But I was like, but wait, everyone else isn't. So this must be the outfit that they were planning for her to wear. I love the elements of it. I think that jacket is incredible, but it doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know if it's just that we needed one element to be looser or something. I'm not sure, but it is an outfit. So they're all standing around, and Murphy has out our beloved prank book. She says, I've been looking through my list of revenge techniques. She holds it up, says Volume 2, Best of the 80s. And thinks that maybe the glue and the comb thing might be the best bet. And they all agree. Jim says he loves glue and the comb.
And I love that it's a loose leaf notebook, with literal handwriting in it.
The elevator opens, and the consultant arrives in the process of criticizing Miles' outfit. It is Harry Shearer.
Should I explain to everyone who Harry Shearer is?
If they don't, they should know.
Probably know his voice. Mm-hmm. Maybe you know him from This Is Spinal Tap. But the reason I say voice is because probably what will be in his obituary, Harry, will be the fact that he is many, many voices on The Simpsons. From the beginning, including Mr. Burns, Smithers, Principal Skinner, Ned Flanders. And he is also in This Is Spinal Tap in 1984 with Michael McKean, who I had sort of forgotten about this. He and Michael McKean and David Lander started out in the 70s, late 60s to mid 70s, in an improv radio comedy group called The Credibility Gap. Mm-hmm. I think they also did sketches as well. And I had known that because David Lander, who people may not realize with Michael McKean, were Lenny and Squiggy on Laverne and Shirley, and they did those characters with the credibility gap, and that's where they were found. And then those characters of Lenny and Squiggy were sort of put onto this sitcom. So they had already created these characters beforehand. But also what I find interesting about Harry that people may not realize is that he was a child actor. And he was on radio a lot when he was a kid. When he was 4 years old, he was on, for example, Jack Benny a lot. And another actor who did a lot of radio at that time and was also on Jack Benny was Mel Blanc, which, if people don't know, is the voice of Bugs Bunny, Barney Rubble, and pretty much like every famous Looney Tunes character. So here you have someone who he felt kind of brought him under his wing, not knowing that like years later, he would be pretty much sort of the Mel Blanc of his time, right? And I think that's so lovely. And also was interesting that when he was approached to do The Simpsons, at first he didn't want to do it, because he was under the impression that that kind of voiceover work or cartoon work would be done alone. And he had no interest in doing something alone. He loved ensemble. And they promised him that they would all work together. So he's really had an amazing career. But I think that lately, you know, more people would probably know him from The Simpsons and his voice. He was also on SNL for a number of years, back and forth. He was there when Lorne Michaels was there, and then he was invited back more to be on camera when Dick Ebersol was there, did a lot of stuff with Martin Short. He's a wonderful comic actor, and it's great to see his face.
He's incredible. As of this recording, he is credited with 747 episodes of The Simpsons, which is bananas. And my family are true devotees of the Christopher Guest cinematic universe. So that is what I grew up knowing Harry Shearer from. My family loves This Is Spinal Tap, Mighty Wind, I mean, everything. All Christopher Guest movies. But his presence is always so notable when he's in one of them. He's so unique. He has shocking to hear, has such a command of his voice. But I love seeing him. He's such a goober in this episode. His vibe has this mix of like hipster know-it-all meets youth pastor meets like your dad talking to his kids, being like, "Come on, sport." It's fascinating. His choices and his
great.
His choice of physical proximity with other actors is hilarious to me when he gets a little too close in familiarity with some of these characters, especially with Jim. When he's just like right up in there with Jim, it makes me so happy. Speaking of, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So he's telling Miles that you got to have your own personal style. The blue blazer, the gray suit, they're gone. He says, I mean, unless you don't mind people coming up and asking you for an extra pillow and help with the tray table. Poor Miles just looks like, what? This is my grown-up outfit. This makes me look like a grown-up. He introduces himself as Chris Bishop, image consultant. And my favorite joke of this entire episode is in response, Frank so weakly just goes, "Maybe you've heard of me?" It's like no one else says really hello. Good. It's just like, Chris Bishop, image consultant. "Maybe you've heard of me?" And he just like wilts off to the corner. It is the perfect joke. It could be so overlooked, but it's done so beautifully. You had to have been paying attention earlier, and then watching Joe Regalbuto, his physical choices in this scene in particular. He is a destroyed, wilted man.
Yeah.
I love him so much. Chris says he knows how they're feeling. Change is scary, and he's the change guy. But he doesn't want them to think of him as their enemy. Think of him as the guy who's come to save your show.
So condescending.
He does this, like, tiny light bulb moment. Think of him as the guy who's come to save your show. Like, that is so insulting. Murphy turns to him and says, "Can I borrow your comb?" To which Miles says, "Murphy, do not." So Chris says he's cutting to the chase. He's viewed hundreds of hours of FYI. He says, "Jim." And Jim goes, "Yes, what?" He says, "You don't blink, Jim. Do you know that about yourself?" As Charlie just stares. I also think it's very funny because after he says, "We got to loosen you up, get some eyelid action, get you out of that suit and tie thing." What I love is like Charlie Kimbrough's go-to physical choice when Jim is flustered is to blink a lot. So his response to that is just like rapidly blink and look flustered. He says, Frank's already seated. His head is in his hand already. Like he's already a defeated, wilted man. And Chris has a rolled up piece of paper in his hand and kneels down and taps Frank on the, like literally like, "Hey, sport, how you doing?" Like just like taps him on the knee. And He says, we can solve this visibility problem if we just turn up that volume. Frank's an investigative reporter. He does dangerous things. We need to exploit that. So he's come up with a new segment called Let Frank Do It, where people write in and ask Frank things like, what's it like to jump off a bridge with a bungee cord? And then Frank does it. Actually, let's save that one. Let's do that one on Tuesday. He tells Frank to wear tight shoes and don't eat anything for breakfast.
Yeah.
And he whips around to Corky. And Corky, my self-aware queen, says, I know I'm not perfect. I don't have a journalism background, but I am learning and I know I can do better.
Oh.
The growth of this woman. And he says, what are you talking about? We're not going to change a single thing about you. Except maybe hike that skirt up a bit. Oh, what the hell? Just lift it over your head. Corky's face is feminine disgust, and I love it.
This feels so relevant even today,
Yep.
unfortunately. And I love this because it's so obvious what they're poking fun at, right?
Yep.
They're not we're not laughing with them, we're laughing at them because it's sadly very true.
Yep, and it's still true. It's such a quick moment, but it's one of the first times I've seen Corky have like legit grounded feminine rage, where like she understands the joke that's being made at her expense in a way that I think a lot of times we've seen Corky as the person who's like, oh, that's just like boys pick on you because they like you, like that kind of person who's like
Yeah.
aware that it's teasing and maybe it's a little gross, but it's fine. They're just flattering. This is one of the first times I've seen Corky legitimately disgusted and insulted by that treatment.
And she's uncomfortable
Yeah,
through
and she's
the
not playing
entire
along.
episode. Yeah, she's really uncomfortable and seems almost sometimes afraid to say anything. Like
Exactly.
she tries to say something and then they're like, no, it looks great. She's so uncomfortable.
Well, because we know that in this type of scenario, Corky is a like primary victim of this type of treatment. And it's one of the first times where we've seen her be actually vulnerable in it and not,
Yeah.
just unknowingly complicit in her survival of this world. It's
Yeah.
I loved seeing her look that uncomfortable and angry.
Yeah.
And he turns, he says, so that leaves us with you, Murphy. Murphy says, no, it doesn't. And he says, you definitely have your own style, but have a serious warmth problem. And he said, maybe it's because of those hard-hitting interviews. He wants to see her go one-on-one with the average American citizen. Take the pulse of the heartland. What do you think? She says, I love it, Chris. I really do. And I'd like to meet with you about it tonight. At the docks.
I always love the way she goes, at the docks.
And he says, okay, it's fine. He can't force anything. But take a look around. All of the networks are developing itchy trigger fingers. The second the ratings waver, the axe falls. This is where I want to jump in and say, Chris, do they have a gun or do they have an axe? You metaphor, my man. Which this is not a judgment of the writers. I think it's actually brilliant. I feel like this is the man who mixes metaphors constantly and thinks he's a genius.
Oh, yeah, no, this is totally on purpose.
I love it so much. Miles asks Chris if maybe they can just have time to absorb it all. And Chris says, absolutely fine. They'll take Miles shopping. And as they walk out, Miles goes, yeah, maybe I should go with like a double vent in the jacket. And then he mutters as they walk away, I don't know if I'm ready for that.
Now, something that Chris brings up, which I think is really interesting and actually is referencing to things we've talked about before that was happening around this time. He makes a list of news people or news-oriented people who got the axe because of image issues, right? Kathleen Sullivan is out, he says, someone that we spoke about who was in the finale last season, right? That she started having gray hair and then there were all these rumors about her. And so she got the axe for being old. And then he lists John Palmer. And I didn't know who John Palmer was, so I Googled him. So what was really interesting was that we've talked about Deborah Norville before, and that Deborah Norville had been brought on as sort of, a replacement for Jane Pauley because she was young and perky and maybe didn't have as much experience per se. And so she replaced John Palmer, who was sort of the person before all of the breaks, who would do the news sections. And I didn't realize that. So this really fits in so well into what the episode is about, right? That this sort of older gentleman who'd been doing the news on the Today Show since like the early 80s was pretty much let go from NBC in 89 to sort of bring in this successor to Jane Pauley, who was also older. So the story of John Palmer and Deborah Norville is exactly what this episode is about this sort of image, this idea that what the audience needs is sort of young and bright and being talked down to. And I thought that was really interesting. that it's even just the mention of these people. And I don't know if at the time, obviously, people would be more aware of that, but it was something that I just didn't remember being, young. And I thought it was an interesting thing to bring up. So now we're on set, and the first thing we see is Miles's chair and this very sort of bright FYI symbol on the TV. It looks a lot like FYI for kids.
Yeah. The design of it feels more like midday talk show for moms.
And then Miles enters, and I felt like he looked like he was out of The Player or like some like parody of like 80s, 90s, like Hollywood, like, hey, how you doing? He's got glasses, his hair is kind of spiked up, expensive suit, coat with the collar turned up. He's got a scarf.
The acreage of the shoulders. And to be specific, the hair isn't spiked as much as it is solid and tall.
Yes, I was trying to find a better way to explain it. You're right. Spiked is really not what it is. It's just sort of that sort of 80s, like,
It's like a tall helmet.
it's a lot of product.
Yeah, every product is in that hair.
And everyone is sort of shocked. But what's great is that Murphy literally laughs in his face.
Yep.
And all of this sort of, self-esteem that he has, being pumped up just sort of drains out of him. He's not very happy with being laughed at. Murphy, again, has a sort of very similar thing that she wore in the first scene, right? Where it's like sort of this wrap skirt thing and a lovely blouse. I really like this for her.
Okay, I was going to say, this is jumping ahead to mine, but it's interesting that Murphy's outfit isn't a departure.
Yes,
Like,
you're
I
right.
know that
It
Chris
isn't.
says, like, you obviously have your own style, but like, if they want her to be warmer, I'm shocked they didn't dress her like Mrs. Hooley to come.
I mean, I hadn't thought about this until you brought this up, but just off the cuff, maybe because it's less severe, she's not wearing like a jacket, right? She's not wearing a suit. She's a little more casual, maybe.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's because I'm used to seeing Murphy casual off set, and so I'm not thinking just about what she wears on camera, but I swear we've seen her wear things that are not just blazers.
I'm trying to think. I feel like on the show, not so much.
She's in blazer.
Yeah,
It's fascinating because I'm like, her outfit is very Murphy.
Yeah, but I think it's very Murphy in The Office. So the set looks very. Eventually, they call it Santa Fe. I was like, New Mexico white girl appropriation, which we've talked about
American
before.
Southwest.
Southwest, yes, we've talked about this before. It was very big in the '80s and even early '90s a bit. I found a bunch of articles that were like, the Santa Fe look was very big in the 80s. Miles is very upset. He says, this is not a nurturing environment. Some of us are trying to change and grow. And Murphy says that some of us are trying to hold on to one last shred of dignity. She feels the set looks like Robert Redford's living room. I feel like of the time. Then, of course, Chris shows up. He very, I feel like, doesn't believe this, but he's just saying it, that he thinks that, like, this is just this crap is just very in with women, 18 to 34. I really think that he believes that it's a great set and he's just saying that to make them feel better, even though it's probably true. And that he needs Murphy to radiate friendliness and caring. And here comes one of my favorite lines from the whole series, which encapsulates Murphy, is that she says when she interviewed Ollie North, he said the experience was like sticking his face in a buzzsaw. I cherish those words, Chris. I even had that embroidered on a pillow because that's just the kind of gal I am. And then Miles says that Murphy will promise to be less like a power tool. Yeah.
I love a power tool.
As much as Miles is being like really positive with Murphy, when he talks to Chris privately, he does have major reservations. And I really like that because it shows that like even Miles doesn't really agree with this. He's just trying to go, change and go with the flow.
Yeah.
He wants the show to be successful. And Chris, of course, uses Miles' new confidence, against him by saying, well, when women look at you now, what do you think they're thinking? Because, of course, he helped him, with this whole outfit. And Miles says that he thinks that women are thinking, who is this small god?
It's my favorite line of his.
And then the rest of our gang comes out. Jim is dressed in sort of professor chic with this sort of big sweater. I don't know if it has sort of, patches, but it should. Big sort of
It should
collar.
have like I call them like G-paw sweaters where it's like the elbow patch and the like leather buttons.
And
but it's a very like almost Mr. Rogers.
Yes. And he's got the Charles Kimbrough curly hair that we never see Jim do. And he goes, good Lord, there's no desk. Corky comes out in a very short skirt and she looks so uncomfortable. She's like, trying to walk, but she's afraid she's going to show something. She's so uncomfortable. Frank is dressed in leather like he's a biker and then also one of the village people.
Also, like a T-bird from Greece.
Yes, it's like someone just had no clue and threw a whole bunch of stuff together like, this is
Black,
cool.
leather, dangerous.
Something I also never noticed before, considering I've seen this so many times, but the mugs.
I was going to say, I love these mugs.
The mugs, not only is the handle cacti, is that what I would say?
It's like the arm of a saguaro cactus coming out.
Yeah, and they look like penises.
Yes, I'm obsessed with these mugs. If someone knows where I can find this mug, I need to own it. It's insane.
I should also mention that not only is Corky uncomfortable with her skirt, but like Frank is like pulling at the crotch of his pants. Like obviously he's also very uncomfortable. Probably some chafing going on is my guess.
And the beaver is back.
The beaver. So we're talking about Frank's hair. Just to clarify, if people maybe were listening on the treadmill and maybe didn't hear that thing from before.
He called it a beaver.
Anyway, they're just, again, this is such a great ensemble episode. I feel like this is a great episode to like show someone who maybe doesn't know the show at all yet and kind of like introduce them to it. What's also great is that the first time that Jim sees Miles is he goes, "Who are you? Oh my God."
It's so good.
So the show starts and we play this opening, which is like Murphy with a dog, which I'm pretty sure is one of her real dogs at the time.
Yeah.
I recognize this
I think it is.
from the cover of McCall magazines. I think this is Jerry. I just remember one of her dogs was named Jerry for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Jim is in a car with a cell phone, which by the way was a big deal to have a phone in your car.
It means he's a modern man. He's not some old relic.
Corky is sitting in the bullpen on her legs in the most uncomfortable way possible just to show her legs.
She is doing the side saddle kneel on an office chair, and the legs, the knees and the bottom of the skirt are pointed toward camera. Like it is implying that if she shifted, you could see up her short skirt. It's very gross.
Frank is bungee jumping, as Chris already said that he would do. He does not look like he's having fun. So we start the show and Jim does not know what to do with his legs. He's oddly blinking. Is so funny. And then Frank introduces his "Let Frank Do It," which it's just him doing crazy stunts like he's on Fear Factor. And this is also the first time that Corky is introduced as Corky Sherwood Forrest for the first time.
Yeah! I just need to drop in my favorite thing that they do to Frank is they say that, try to mention him as often as possible so that the audience gets familiar with Frank. And so they start saying Frank's name like Miles was saying girlfriend at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah. Frank.
Like, so Frank, what do you think, Frank? So we're going to set up, it is just like, oh, poor guy.
So also very funny is Corky's segment for today's show is that she was a day in the life of an air traffic controller and that she's so sorry and thank you for the quick action when she dropped a box of Raisinets on the radar screen. I love her little, I'm so sorry. And then Jim says, as if they're having a conversation, Murphy has interviewed some of the most powerful people in the world. And then they all do fake banter and drink from their horrible penis mugs. And sorry, cacti. And it's so funny.
This segment is such I don't know why it isn't highlighted more as showing how incredible these actors are as physical comedians.
Yeah.
Everything each one of them does to the tiniest level just shows how wrong this is.
Oh, yeah.
It's so brilliant.
They all go, oh yeah, that's so true, as they like drink out of their mugs all at the same time. And
Jim's blinking.
Jim is blinking a lot. And then he tries to introduce Murphy's segment, which he obviously hates, this idea that they decided to just interview a regular person out of the phone book, because that's how we do this now. He's just so unhappy. And so Murphy is going to talk to Mrs. Betty Hooley from Greenfield, Idaho.
What a name.
Jesse, I'm gonna throw it to you. Jesse?
Thank you, Lauren. Betty Hooley, what a name. And what a visual. This woman sings in the church choir.
Yes.
She loves pale pastels. She's in this pink lavender pastel blouse and skirt. Her hair, I wouldn't be surprised if she was like, had like a Gibson girl hairdo, like just big and up and round
Yeah.
and soft but contained.
She's very sort of the way that she's presented together feels very Phyllis Schlafly to me.
Phyllis Schlafly would love her.
Oh, they would
Would
love each
her.
other. Love each
They
other.
would love each other. And this is why I'm like, this is what people thought a warm woman looked like. So I just like, oh, if they had given Murphy like this hairdo for the segment, I would have laughed so hard. So Murphy is there. She's in her lovely outfit that we both want. I want that dress, actually. She says, so, Mrs. Hooley, the challenges facing an American family in the 1990s must be enormous. And she asks her, how do you make ends meet? She's a picture of Americana feminine attributes. And she says, you know, it isn't easy to make ends meet. They both work so they can pay bills and send their children to good schools. And you could see Murphy kind of go, oh, okay, a working mother. She says, so you sacrificed because you put a high priority on education. Like, this seems like you could tell Murphy's like, ooh, an opportunity. Betty says, well, they didn't plan on sending their children to an expensive private school, but they really had no choice once the Italians took over.
The Italians.
Murphy freezes and goes, excuse me? And Betty says, the Italians. There are a lot of them in the neighborhood. They look like regular families, but you know they're up to no good. She doesn't want her children around them, so they had no choice. We cut to a shot of the monitor with Chris and Miles and some of the crew behind it. And you just see Murphy looking toward them, looking horrified in the monitor. And Chris just reminding her silently to smile.
Wish that they would have turned to a shot of Frank.
I know.
Being like,
oh my God.
What?
Yeah, I'm actually slightly sad we don't get shots of the gang during this.
Yeah. It's all Miles and Chris. Yeah.
So Murphy plasts a frozen smile and turns back to Betty and says, let's talk about the American dream. Do you own your own home? And Betty says, yes, when they got married, that was one of their goals. And last year, they finally were able to buy their dream house. And Murphy says, great. So good old American work ethic paid off. And Betty says, it did until the black people moved in next door. It's all over now. And then she just starts talking. And she says, you know, it's like what happened when the Chinese man bought the dry cleaners from the Jewish people. Miles is, we cut back to the monitor and Miles is just shaking his head while we hear Betty complaining that all of a sudden there's no free delivery anymore. We cut back to Betty and Betty says they're cheaper than the Jewish people. And they don't even stuff the sleeves with paper. At least the Jews stuffed paper. Ugh. She says, although they did overcharge her for a silk blouse, it's their way.
It's their way.
And she has this like conspiratorial smile. And just like, oh! We cut back to the monitor. And what I love is Harry Shearer as Chris is doing this like pushing motion as if to just like push it down and keep going.
Keep going.
We know what's about to happen. But what I love is what Miles does. Miles' head is down. He is not watching. And he's gesturing as if to cue what happens. Like he just knows it's like in 3, 2, 1. And then Murphy starts speaking.
Yes.
She says, Mrs. Hooley, has anyone ever accused you of being a bigot?
Who, me?
And she goes, who, me? She says, no, the other Mrs. Hooley. Yes, you. And I'm going to read you Murphy's little speech that happens. She says, in case you haven't heard, there are entire black families in this country who go through their entire lives as fine, upstanding citizens, and some of them aren't even good dancers. And I'll bet there are at least 1 or 2 Italians who have never put a horse's head in a bed. Where is your mind, Mrs. Hooley? Have you ever read a newspaper? Would you even recognize one if you saw one? I'm sure you're dying to answer these questions and maybe even tell us why Hitler was misunderstood, but I don't want to keep you from your Ku Klux Klan meeting. Back to you, Jim.
The way that she builds and builds this until her head is literally shaking. This is why Candice Bergen has so many Emmys. Like,
It's so good.
And this season has a lot of these monologues like this. And I don't want it to sound like, oh, she just does the same thing. They're all different monologues. But it's just like that Murphy, and we've talked about this before, right? Like Murphy says what we wish sometimes that we'd want to say, right? I mean, I think in this situation we would say it. But you know what I mean? Like she becomes this sort of mouthpiece of just like standing up for like the little person, so to speak, for people who are doing wrong things and says what we want to say with the passion that we want her to say it. And it's great.
She's kind of that perfect example of what Meg Ryan's character talks about in You've Got Mail, about in the moment that you're faced with someone horrible, you say the exact thing you would have wanted to say in that moment, and how that is a skill that most normal people don't have.
Yeah. And this,
Of being able to respond to somebody with the right words at the right time with the passion you want to say. Murphy is that for us vicariously many times, where because she has incredible writing behind her, we get to see these moments that we don't see in real life that you want to see in real life, which is someone just coming at this woman and then just mic dropping with a back to you, Jim.
and this scene, which I was mentioning off mic to Jesse, is the scene that I see on Twitter the most, that people like find on YouTube and like, oh, have you seen this? Like, I would say that if most people don't know Murphy Brown, who are like actively online, they would go, oh, I know this scene. Oh, okay.
It fascinates me that this is the scene. I'm not surprised that it's popular.
Yeah.
But, like I think about, every 6 months or so, the clip from The West Wing where Bartlett shoots down the conservative radio host who pretends to be a doctor and tells everyone that they're going to hell. That clip circulates constantly. It's one of my favorites, but it also just circulates constantly as people rediscover it. It fascinates me that this is the scene from Murphy Brown that does that.
Well, I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think it's because of the content, obviously, right? But it's also because it's just what's available. It's also available. I mean, maybe other than the availability is just that people want to say this to people online, maybe?
I think that's part of it. I think it's the one that's resonating with current cultural conversations.
Absolutely.
And being able to say, like, look, this was being said in the early 90s and still. So after she has this, we cut back to the monitor stand. The crew behind it is thrilled. Chris is horrified. And Miles is Miles. Yes.
We cut to the bullpen. Off the elevator comes our FYI team, looking as if they're all about to laugh. Particularly Joe. I would be very curious how many times they tried to do this scene, because it looks like they could barely get through it. But it's okay, because we love the show. They walk up to the FYI meeting table, which has newspapers. Murphy puts a garbage pail on the top. And then Frank takes his toupee off. Murphy smiles. They put it in the garbage pail. Jim hands Corky matches. The matches are then handed to Frank, who then sets his hair on fire, toupee, I mean, in the garbage pail. And the whole bullpen cheers with excitement. It's a wonderful scene, even though they obviously are laughing. And then Miles comes off the elevator dressed as, well, Murphy describes him as Otto the Gay Woodsman. It feels, again, cultural appropriation with tiny legs. But he's wearing a Native American blanket as a coat sweater thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So Chris says that Murphy was the whole problem last night. And Murphy says something which is, I think, very important, is that people like him come in, make all these changes, and then leave, and then they are left to deal with the consequences. And that she would like to run him out on a rail. To which Frank goes, no, let Frank do it. And then the whole bullpen cheers. He says, don't come crying to him when American Home Accidents is beating them. Obviously a reference to America's Home Video. And that their show is a dying breed, news and information and cold hard facts, which is feels very of today, actually. I feel like his prediction does come true, which we've talked about a lot, that this feels like a crossroads in media and entertainment to where we are today. So then Chris leaves on what you assume would be sort of his high horse, only he has a comb glued to the back of his head. And we are to assume that Murphy did it. Miles has an envelope. They got 600 calls, and he hasn't opened it yet. And they're worried that maybe the calls were that people loved it, but it could be that people hated it, and they don't know. I would say that most people call when they hate something, or they write letters when they hate something, but who knows, right? So Murphy decides that they need to go with their instincts. And
wait, I have a
oh, go ahead.
My curiosity is, I agree. I think most people call when they hate something. My question is, did they hate the format, or did they hate what Murphy did to Mrs. Hooley?
Oh, good point.
That's my question. Which part did they hate?
That's right. Well, I think the same way, and I'm not a racist.
Exactly.
Oh,
anyway.
That's a really good point.
That's my thought experiment, is like, what were they mad about?
Oh, I love that. That is so great. I mean, the thing that we're getting at is that they don't open it. You know,
we'll never know.
They'll never know. Miles says that he realizes so to speak, how wrong they are and how can he not sitting wearing Trigger's blanket. I'm not sure anyone really knows who Trigger was, but he was the horse for the Lone Ranger.
It was a great joke for the day.
It was a
I'll
great
tell you
joke
that.
for the day, but I don't know if anyone will get it now. So he says that they need to go with their instincts, you know, that they can't talk down to people or else they train them to accept very little. And he votes for real news and he rips up the envelope. Yay! And that, what are they standing around for? They need to get ready for their 391st show to produce.
That's right.
Huzzah! Everyone sort of spreads out. Miles goes to throw out the envelope in the garbage that is sitting on the table and notices that Frank's toupee is burnt in the trash can. He goes, "Oh, Frank, you burnt your hair again. How many times do I have to tell you this? These things cost money." And then he runs after Frank. And I love that Joe sort of puts his hand all over his hair ooh, kind of like a little brother. And that's the end of an excellent episode and an excellent season opener.
Yeah, that's an incredible first episode for a season.
It's
so good. It requires so much trust of the audience to just follow.
Mm-hmm.
There's no kind of re-explaining of what happened. We're going to assume that you're with us and you're following. It's really, they have really smart multi-part jokes that pay off later in it's a great episode. The cast is at their snappiest, at their best physical choice. It's just great.
No, this is one of my favorite episodes. And it's hard to say it's my favorite episode of the season because there's so many other great ones, but it's just, yeah.
There's so much Jerry Gold to come.
There is a lot of Jerry Gold. Thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, we can't do this without you. If you love the show, leave us a review. If you'd like to support the show, we have a Patreon. We have a Buy Us a Coffee. You can be, a monthly member and get special unedited episodes, special things that we record, and we so appreciate it. But we also appreciate you in any capacity that you come and join us on this lovely trip.
Yeah, financially you can't support us. Consider telling someone you think might be interested, or share it on a story on a social media, if you will.
We're at Murphy Brown Pod everywhere on social media. You can also email us at murphybrownpod@gmail.com if you have some thoughts. We always love to hear people's thoughts. Send us your focus group.
Tell us. Okay, I'm requesting.
Yeah.
Tell us if you have been in a focus group.
Oh.
Tell us an anecdote. I would love to hear focus group anecdotes.
Yeah.
And perhaps, if we get enough, we will share them with each other on a Patreon.
Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. And we'll see you next time
For another edition of FYI,
the Murphy Brown Podcast.